Let me start again. First of all, Charlie and I want to thank everybody for attending this webinar. You know, ever since the Securities and Exchange Commission mandated the use of XBRL by public companies, by mutual funds, and actually by credit rating agencies, there's been a growing interest in XBRL. The objective of the webinar today is to introduce XBRL, its key concepts, and explain how it works and who's using it today. So we're lucky today to actually have Charlie Hoffman with us. Charlie has written extensively on XBRL and is actually currently working on a book, XBRL for Dummies. Charlie actually won the AICPA's Innovation User Technology Award for his pioneering work in the initial development of XBRL. So the agenda today matches what we often hear when we're asked by folks learning about XBRL. First of all, what is it? We'll start off with a basic introduction to XBRL, the key concepts, and how the language is put together. Next, we'll answer the question, why is XBRL different than XML? If it's just about tagging the data, why not just use XML? Charlie, who worked extensively through this question while pioneering the development of XBRL, will provide some concise answers to this question. And then finally, who is using XBRL? With the growing interest in XBRL, while the growing interest in XBRL is a recent phenomena in the United States, based mainly on the SEC mandate, XBRL has its roots going back 10 years. Over the years, it's been adopted by banking supervisors, security exchanges, company houses, and governments across the world. We'll take a quick look at some of those efforts. So to start off and dive into the content, first, what is XBRL? First, it stands for Extensible Business Reporting Language, and the genesis of XBRL is about providing a language for exchanging information, business information, not just the numbers, but the information about the numbers. Think of a standard balance sheet. It's not just about assets, liabilities, and shareholder equity. It's also about the various relationships between those various numbers and concepts. XBRL is a global standard. XBRL standard is managed and maintained by an organization called XBRL International. You can go to their website at www.xbrl.org. XBRL International is comprised of about 30 local jurisdictions and about 550 member companies. The local jurisdictions can be sort of geographic or regional in nature, such as there is an XBRL US organization, XBRL France, etc., or it also can be focused on a specific topic. There's a XBRL jurisdiction run by the IASB, International Accounting Standard Board, and there's another one with the OCEG, which is looking specifically at the topic of XBRL and its application for GRC. A key attribute of XBRL is that it supports the automated exchange of business information between computers or applications. So the idea is you can become much more efficient in terms of exchanging information between various organizations. As both Charlie and I will discuss, XBRL is based on XML, is an XML language, and part of what you'll see and hear today will be very familiar. XBRL is also a mandate, as we'll see in the last section. Use of XBRL for business reporting has been mandated across the world, and in fact, even in the U.S., the FDIC has been using XBRL for collecting call reports from banks for the past 3 years. And then the last topic, probably of interest to the XML folks in this crew, is because XBRL includes not just the data, but information around the data, it can also be used to convey semantic information over the web. Charlie will have a bit more to say about this. So let's dive into the fundamentals of XBRL. Two key concepts within XBRL are instance documents and taxonomies. Taxonomies provide the dictionary or vocabulary of the information you want to exchange. Things like assets, liabilities, net income, things like that, gross profit, number of loans outstanding. Those concepts can be monetary units, they can be numeric units, they can be text. But a taxonomy is more than just this dictionary of concepts. It also contains information about the concepts and relationships between the concepts. and actually we'll go into a bit more detail in a couple of slides. Instance documents contain the information you want to exchange, just the facts. For example, you may have a concept gross profit, the value may be 1 million, the context may be the first quarter of 2009, the units are dollars. Instance documents are just flat lists of facts. The information on how to understand and organize the taxonomy, organize the facts are in the taxonomy. Any exchange of information between two parties includes both the instance document and a pointer to the taxonomy. So here's an example of what the inside of an instance document might look like. You see there's something that's called GAAP, and that's actually the namespace of the taxonomy. There's a concept, which is net income or loss. There's a context that says this is for a given period, units, and then there's the actual value. A couple things, if you look at the second example there, you can report multiple contexts. So you can report an individual concept such as income tax expense benefits, which I took out of an SEC filing here, and you can report it for 2008, 2007, 2006, all in the same instance document. Facts can be numeric or text, and the key thing about this is it's a flat list. It's normalized, so it's much easier to deal with in terms of various applications. Now let's dive into the taxonomy, which is some of the key parts of XBRL. So in XBRL, first is a dictionary of concepts. So it's a flat list of all the things that I want to represent. Again, back to gross profit, net income, etc. Then it adds a couple of resources, and there are two types of resources. First is the resource, there are two kinds of things that add. First are resources, the other relations. Resources add information about the concepts. So for example, there's something called a label link base. And a label link space allows me to describe how I want to present this if, for example, I'm writing out a report, creating a human readable form. And so while the concept may be net income or loss, one single word, I may want that label to be net income or parentheses loss. Or the other thing I can do with this is actually say, potentially I want to represent this to somebody in France, so what's the French version of that label? So one of the interesting things about taxonomies is I can have multiple link bases. So I could have associated with the taxonomy an English link base, a French link base, multiple languages link base. The next thing is this concept of references, and what I want to do is be able to point at something so that both parties who are exchanging information can agree on what the concept means. For example, in the US GAAP, in the taxonomy, they're a pointer to the FASB, Financial Accounting Standards Board, definition of what net income or loss means, so that I can, as I exchange information, make sure that both people agree on it. There's and we'll talk about it a bit in a couple of slides, formula link base, and what that allows me to do is add information about mathematical calculations associated with the resources. And we'll go some examples of that. Besides that, the other thing that's included in taxonomy is relations. So I can define the relationships between the various elements. The kinds of relationships you'll find in the standard taxonomy are presentation. So what's the hierarchy if I'm doing a balance sheet or if I'm doing an income statement? What's the way I want that information presented? How do I actually, what's the indentation, what's the hierarchy, what's the possible ordering? The other thing that I want to do, and this is, again, important in transferring business information, is calculation link base. So what I want to do is be able to say, by the way, I have this concept of assets, liabilities, and shareholder equity. What I want to do is be able to say that there's a mathematical relation, simple calculation relationship that says assets minus liabilities equals shareholder equity, or assets, total assets equal current assets and non-current assets. This is one of the key capabilities of XBRL in terms of being able to ensure data quality. within the taxonomy, by expressing these relationships, I can make sure before I actually communicate some information, I can validate it. I can make sure that I have quality data, that I have an income statement that puts, I have a balance sheet that puts, et cetera, et cetera. One of the key things about the use of XBRL is that there are a number of publicly available taxonomies out there. The SEC actually helped fund the development of the latest U.S. GAAP taxonomy that it's using for SEC filings. IASB has worked very hard on creating IFRS taxonomies. For bank reporting, for doing some of the Basel II reporting, there are some specific taxonomies called co-rep, fin-rep that capture not only the financial information, but the risk metrics for banks reporting under Basel II. There's GL for doing general ledger, and one of the examples we'll see is the use of general ledger taxonomy inside an enterprise. CSR, corporate social responsibility, I mentioned before the OCEG working on a taxonomy for governance, risk, and compliance, and for the SEC has also worked on creating a risk-return taxonomy for mutual funds. In addition to public taxonomies, we find a lot of folks who will build specific taxonomies to solve the business case they're working on. For example, the FDIC created a special taxonomy to allow them to accept and process, consume call reports from banks, and the Microfinance Information Exchange built a very interesting taxonomy that actually is a two bottom line taxonomy. It captures not only the information about the financial position of the microfinance institution, it also has part of the taxonomy that captures the social impact of the microfinance institution. So the taxonomy has the number of minorities that have been helped, number of loans that are going to rurals, variety of things that allow them to express the information. So taxonomies are key to the use of XBRL. Here we have an example using a taxonomy tool called Taxonomy Designer. We're looking at the U.S. GAAP taxonomy, and we're looking at the net income loss concept, and we see it represented in a variety of different ways. We see it represented in the presentation link base on the left-hand side, which is the ordering if somebody was going to render it or print it out, the ordering that it'd be. We see the calculation link base, and notice that it's in a different order. The other thing in the calculation link base, notice that there are weights assigned, that there's a 1 or a -1 based on whether it's a debit or a credit. And then the third pane is the definition view. It's important to note that you can also have multiple presentations or multiple calculations in the taxonomy. Concept may appear in multiple places. For example, U.S. GAAP, it may be in a presentation calculation for income statement and also the cash flow statement. Next slide sort of pulls it all together that says, there's this concept of a fact and then all the associated things, the labels, the presentations, the references, the calculations. Charlie likes to describe this as a star schema. And then just a couple more things about XBRL fundamentals before I turn it over to Charlie is first that taxonomies are extendable, that you can take the U.S. GAAP taxonomy and make additions to it. In fact, the SEC Edgar Filing Guide talks about the cases that a filer may extend the U.S. GAAP taxonomy. For example, creating new labels to match specifically what they're filing in their 10Qs or to add new concepts. They can also be extended to create new ways of presenting the information or new ways of calculating how the information fits together. Important to note that the power of XBRL is that you can extend taxonomies without affecting the applications, the process of the information. If you create a new label link base, it doesn't affect the underlying application that deals with the concept directly. The other thing that you can do is not only extending individual taxonomies, you can extend XBRL itself by creating new relationship definitions by creating new definition link bases. Current state of XBRL is it's at 2.1, and if you go to that xbrl.org website, you can see XBRL 2.1 is recommended, has been adopted. Dimensions, which allows you to create dimensional context for XBRL, is also adopted. Formulas, the calculations, the complex math calculations is a proposed recommendation. Rendering is how you present it, ways of presenting it in a human readable form is a candidate, and working on versioning, how you understand how taxonomies evolve, is a publicly working draft. So now let's actually talk about a concrete example and use this as a way of turning it over to Charlie. In terms of the idea of XBRL as a semantic web metadata format, look at the way you used to deal with the SEC Edgar database before. If you wanted to compare net income of a variety of companies, the Edgar database was basically document focused. You'd have to actually go from one document, pull out multiple documents, pull the specific information out of it, and create your comparisons. With the new IDEA way within the SEC Gov website, the idea is instead of storing documents, you're storing these XBRL pieces of information, and that you can say, okay, I want to see the net income across this context across all companies. But now I'll actually turn it over to Charlie and let him go into a little more detail. Charlie?
Thanks, Steve. So I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but on the top of the slide there, at least one person is calling XBRL one of the more successful semantic web metadata formats. So if you've ever tried to do a comparison between two companies, and had to go through that process, you'd realize what XBRL provides, and it is in addition to the semantic web, it's a way of getting the information that would have otherwise been in these documents in the Edgar system that you really can't access, the information within the document. There have been a lot of people try, one of the major ones is Edgar Online, and they've built sophisticated and expensive mapping and parsing mechanisms trying to get that information out. So people do want the information. Well, XBRL makes that whole parsing and mapping problem go away by providing the information in XML in a structured document where a computer can just go in there and automatically and accurately grab that information. So next slide, Steve. So we're going to talk about the difference between XBRL and XML. A lot of people have questions about the relation between XBRL and XML. Many technical people, they take their first look at XBRL from the perspective of other traditional XML applications, and right away they become very confused by XML, or by XBRL, and think that XBRL is overly complex. So normally I can do this explanation about the differences in about 3 hours, but I have about 20 minutes, so I'm going to have to do the condensed version here. But fundamentally, what XBRL does is it provides way more than what an XML schema provides to an XML document. So basically, XBRL is XML. There's really no difference. XBRL uses the XML syntax. XBRL also uses XML schema, X-link namespaces in XML, and other global standards that are part of the XML family of specifications. Okay, but what XBRL does, where are we? Yeah, you're right, Steve, sorry. What XBRL does is express semantic meaning, or expresses meaning. XML only articulates syntax. XML schema constrains the syntax, but it does not express semantics. So XBRL's fundamental goal was to express business meaning, the semantics. To do this, XBRL had to build, XBRL had to build some additional features, which everybody needed, using the XML family of specifications and the XML syntax. So for others to do what XBRL does with XML, one would basically have to reinvent all that XBRL has already provided. So, and a large part of that is the ability to express meaning. And because the meaning is expressed, XBRL also allows content validation against that meaning. So it's very difficult to validate the meaning if it's not expressed. And in XML, you really can't express it. I mean, you can, but again, you have to reinvent what XBRL has already created. But these things, you simply cannot allow a company to file an XML document with the SEC and things are not correct. So the numbers have to add up. The things that are supposed to be there need to be there. And this is a fundamental requirement for business users. That's why these things have been added to XBRL. They're critical to making sure that the information is valid. This is nothing that XML schema could even come close to doing. So I think, there we go. In addition, XBRL can express multiple hierarchies of explicit relations. Because XBRL is normalized, I think Steve mentioned this briefly, and separating the definition of concepts and the definition of relations, you can define more than one hierarchy. Further, the hierarchies defined are explicit rather than XML's implicit content model. So again, in XML, those two are mixed. The definition of the contents, the concepts, and the definition of the content model are mixed together, and they get in the way. So if you take a look at RDF and how RDF is constructed, you can appreciate why that separation is important. It basically lets you build graph structures which you can reorganize. The next thing that XBRL provides is organized prescriptive extensibility. So the extensibility of XML and XBRL are very, very different. XML's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. So XML is extensible everywhere. You can extend it in every direction, and it's so flexible in that way that it's hard to use in an automated way extensions that are created. From the other perspective also, the content model is also very restrictive. Once you build a structure, in order to change that structure, you have to build another structure, and then you have to communicate that the two structures are expressing the same thing, but one adds one additional element or something. So that's what XBRL is built to do. I mean, financial reporting, particularly in the U.S., financial reporting is dynamic, and they're not, financial statements are not forms. So XBRL had to meet that use case. And there's a lot of business reporting use cases that are done in that that have to be dynamic and not forms, basically. So I think we're going to the next slide. So I will try to communicate this. Again, I'm a CPA. I am not a technical person. I do know a lot about technology, which I picked up mostly from hanging out with the people that built XBRL and participating in that process, but I'm still trying to figure a lot of these things out and get the correct terminology myself. But so this next one is quite interesting. But basically, the way that I'll state it is that XBRL enables what I call intelligent connections to information. So if you think about it, so XBRL, what I mean by intelligent connections to new information, if you become aware of a new, for example, information feed, to connect to that information feed, typically you have to do some programming. You have to have a programmer do some stuff to grab that information. But with XBRL, it doesn't work that way. Because of the prescriptive manner in which XBRL is extensible, the shape of XBRL will always be the same. And since the shape is known, no programming is necessary to connect to new XBRL. So, another way to say this is that XBRL is basically can be configured with metadata as opposed to programming. And if you think about it, one example is recovery.gov. They want to provide a lot of U.S. Information about spending in the U.S., and I think their goal was to have 800 information feeds within a year or something like that. But I think it's going to be more than that. But if you had to connect to every one of those feeds by having a programmer configure it, it gets time-consuming and expensive. So, and I think we're transitioning to you here, Steve. Is that correct?
That is correct, Charlie. Thanks. And so another example of that is actually a XBRL use case that in Europe, a company called Securities does credit risk underwriting. So if you've got a company who's doing a transaction where they're buying TVs in Poland and shipping them to Italy, who's underwriting that transaction? And so Securities provides the underwriting of that, and the challenge they had is they were getting credit reports from multiple countries in multiple formats, so they actually built an industry consortium to create a taxonomy for handling credit reports. The interesting thing about it is while they actually run a hub, what they allow people to do is if two parties who are exchanging information want to exchange more than just the standard credit information, maybe some prudential information, they allow folks to extend the taxonomy. So if you look at this little cloud here of various folks working, the idea is that two of those parties can actually exchange more information without breaking the fundamental application, the hub running in the middle. But there are a lot of folks who are doing interesting XBRL applications, and part of the next section we'll jump into is just sort of a quick survey of the various XBRL implementations that are out there. Oops, I didn't realize there was a build there. What I get for borrowing slides. So the question is, who is using XBRL? There's actually a very fun website. There's the URL called xbrlplanet.org, and you can see the various efforts going on, and you can actually drill down and look at them. In order, one way to sort of categorize them or look at them is there are security exchanges and regulators. The SEC is just one of them in Korea, in China, in Japan, and the kind of model there is, think about for each security exchange or regulator that's using XBRL, there are probably thousands of companies that need to use XBRL to generate the report. So, for example, in the SEC, over time, it'll be north of 10,000 companies reporting in XBRL. And I think I've got some numbers for FSA, Japan, etc. The next sort of group of people who are doing it are banking supervisors. In the U.S., it's been the FDIC collecting reports from about 8,000 banks. Probably the center of activity here is in Europe, where the Committee for European Banking Supervisors helped create these CoreRep and FinRep taxonomies and recommended that the individual countries, such as Banque de France, Bank of Spain, Luxembourg, etc., use XBRL for collecting some of the Basel II information. And in this case, it's probably hundreds of banks reporting into each individual banking supervisor. Probably the most exciting things from a scale point of view is the standard business reporting. If you look at the Netherlands Taxonomy Project, which changed its name to Netherlands Standard Business Reporting, or the effort going on in Australia, or if you look at the SURFI project in France, the idea is you will literally have hundreds of thousands of companies reporting tax information, reporting various census information to the governments using XBRL. And then finally, information hubs, folks like Securities, folks like the Microfinance Information Exchange, who are building not mandated, not regulated, but basically information hubs to exchange information between a variety of parties. So some specific examples, the SEC, probably everybody's familiar with that, originally starting with 10Ks and 10Qs, financials and associated notes and disclosures, so text also, built on the U.S. GAAP taxonomy, going to get implemented in 3 tranches, starting for companies whose fiscal periods close after June 15th of this year, who are large accelerated filers, and have a public float of over $5 billion. The assumption is there's about 500 of those guys. Mutual funds starting actually next year, risk returns, and actually there's been some work on the credit rating agencies that they need to publish 10% of some of their credit rating information on their website. I assume people will be able to sort of look at these slides or download the presentation later, so here's some URLs, sec.gov spotlight. Japan, Japan Financial Supervisory Authority has a system called EDINet. It's based on JGAAP. It was launched in 2008, number of companies, number of funds, and actually we've worked with NTT Gateway on something called XBRL Gateway that allows people to access that information. Besides U.S. and Japan, there's also work in Korea, there's work in the various Chinese stock exchanges also requiring reports in XBRL. Banking supervisors, I mentioned the FDIC, they created their own taxonomy, and the interesting thing about that is they use business rules or the formulas that Charlie and I had talked about previously for 2 separate things. One is they used formulas to make sure that the banks were submitting proper and valid reports, and then internally within the FDIC they had additional formula link bases to allow them to do the sort of management by exception that says what are the kinds of things that I want to look for in terms of being able to flag a bank to look at it in further depth. So creating formulas that say if outstanding loans is greater than 30% of capital assets or something like that. The interesting thing about it is it's actually a very dynamic application, and the business analysts at the FDIC actually rewrite about 1% of the rules each quarter. Banque de France is got 630 banks reporting a fairly complex taxonomy, the core FINRAP taxonomy, about 12,000, on an average 12,000 elements. Some of the larger banks have a requirement of reporting upwards of 20,000 elements. Some of the smaller banks only need to report a couple of hundred elements. Went live in 2005, and again, there's a URL for folks who are interested in taking a look at that. Netherlands Standard Business Reporting used to be known as the Netherlands Taxonomy Project. Their focus is to do all business-to-government reporting in XBRL, so the idea there is they believe they can reduce the burden on the companies themselves by about 25% by creating a taxonomy, a single taxonomy for use for all business-to-government reporting. And this is actually interesting because if you talk to a lot of the folks who are coming under the mandates, the issue for them is they feel it's just extra work. The value is to the regulator, not to the person generating the report. Efforts like the Netherlands Standard Business Reporting, the Australian Standard Business Reporting, is going to demonstrate that it's not only value to the regulator, it's also value to the business in terms of limiting their, reducing their burden. I think the number that the Netherlands Taxonomy Project uses is about 300 million euros a year of pulling that kind of inefficiencies out of the system. SBR is in the process. The project started in 2006, going live in 2010, and you can see the numbers there in terms of all businesses within Australia reporting to the government. There are, I believe, 12 different agencies, and the idea is now there'll be a single taxonomy, a single kind of way of reporting to all the different agencies. Information hubs that I mentioned, these are examples of cases where it's not about a regulatory mandate, it's about improving the efficiency of either reporting or communication, microfinance information exchange. There's about 100 sources of capital for microfinance, from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to Citibank, et cetera. And there are hundreds, actually I believe there are about 1,200 MFIs out there, or microfinance institutions. The challenge is that each one of those sources of capital have different reporting requirements. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is really interested in the social impact they're having, not necessarily interested in the financial return. Source of capital like Citibank is interested in both, but mainly interested in getting some kind of return on investment. So the idea, instead of having a many-to-many relationship, the Microfinance Information Exchange built a taxonomy that captured both kinds of information, the financial status of the bank and also the kind of social impact it's having. And it went from basically a Excel-oriented manual process and went live using XBRL in 2007. And Wakehole, actually I think Eric's online, is an internal consolidation of 32 different legacy internal systems, and they use the XBRL GL, General Ledger taxonomy, to create a way of consolidating across those. And there's a link there in terms of more about that story. So 2 seconds on who we are. Charlie and I work for Ubmatrix. We provide XBRL software. So in order to do the kinds of things we talked about in the past 40 minutes, XBRL processing engine, something that can take taxonomies, takes instance documents, parse through them, do the validation, do the consumption, do the creation. Application suite for building applications, database adapter to allow you to store XBRL and the semantics associated with the database, report builder used by folks who are generating their reports, such as for the SEC or the banking regulators in Europe, and taxonomy designer used by Charlie and other folks for building taxonomies. We have the technology under some of the larger systems out there, Keen, FDIC, Banque de France, and there's our URL. Here's a couple of places, I'll leave the slide up while we go through the Q&A, where you can learn more about XBRL. Charlie has his blog. That's a place to check it out. We have a part of our website that has a variety of documents, a bunch of webinars to learn more about XBRL. Also case studies that go into some more details about some of the things I talked about. As I mentioned, XBRL is a global standard, and you can get information about it at xbrl.org. And for folks in the U.S., you can go to www.xbrl.us to go find information about the local jurisdiction here. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Catherine and see if there are questions about the process.
Thank you. Yes, that's the process, and there have been a lot of questions flying by, but we've also had a lot of excellent people in this webcast who've been answering them, and I want to thank you all for joining in and doing that. And before we go on to the Q&A, I did want to ask you if you're willing to share. We're recording the entire event, but people are asking if you're willing to share your slides also. And that's always a nice thing to do if you're willing. It's up to you.
Yeah, more than happy to do that. I guess the question is, and you can help with the logistics. Should I?
Yes, if you'll send them to me, I'll post them on the O'Reilly SlideShare account and send everyone a link to that. So it's very easy to do. And that's great. And another question, people are asking about the chat window. There's that's not recorded with the recording, but the best way to keep a copy of that, and I always keep a copy, so you can email me at webcast@o'reilly.com, and I'll be glad to send that to you. But you can also save it yourself just by clicking in the chat window, choosing Select All or Control-A or whatever to select all, and copying and pasting into a text editor, and then you'll have it for yourself. And there are excellent resources I've seen fly by in the window. And so, let me, here's a question from Kurt. Are there any moves to use XBRL as part of the recent carbon trading legislation?
So I guess the question is, can you have both Charlie and I off of mute?
Oh, you're both off mute. You can both talk.
Oh, okay. So Charlie, I know people have been looking at corporate social responsibility taxonomies, but I don't know anything specific about the carbon trading. Do you?
Yeah, I don't know anything specific about the carbon trading either, but there are people that are, I met a gentleman in Washington, D.C. who was trying to put together a lot of these types of disclosure efforts using XBRL, but it certainly could work. I'm not aware of any specific ones. Maybe, if someone else is, maybe they could send a chat and we can communicate that information. Good idea, though.
Okay. And folks, please keep your questions coming and post them in the chat window. And I have a question that was asked earlier, and I'm not sure that that it's been answered yet. It was from Fred, and he just was noting that it appears that there are darned few software applications as of yet to extract and format XBRL in a meaningful way, and he wondered if you could comment on that.
So that's not actually a true statement. There are actually a whole bunch of software applications, and if you go to my blog and then you try and find, I think it's on the left-hand side, a link to the XBRL info blog maintained by the Bank of Spain. There's an awful lot of software applications listed. The problem is not the lack of software applications. It is twofold. Number one, it's the lack of good software applications. And number two, it's the lack of good taxonomies. So the taxonomies, in my experience, have not been created that allow acceptable human-readable renderings. It can be done. I know how to do it. There's a lot of information on my blog on how to do this. You may want to check out XBRL, which is simply an application profile of XBRL. It's a way to achieve that. So it can be done. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that, and maybe Steve can add some.
Yeah, no, I think you sort of captured it, that there are applications out there, and I think as more and more folks, and part of it is the availability as there's more XBRL data out there, there'll be more applications. So the SEC, without a doubt, will drive sort of the development of interesting XBRL applications.
So yeah, I'll speculate something here. So the SEC system will be going live, and we'll have information in that system over the next year. And I speculate that there will be a lot learned about what it takes to effectively render information. It is the SEC's goal to basically get rid of the old Edgar formats and have people exclusively file in XBRL. But that's not going to happen until, basically you can do with the XBRL what you can do today in terms of, rendering the information. I mean, they can't not do that. And then you get, more. It makes no sense at all to have companies file the old formats and the new formats and then have to reconcile the two types of formats. Makes no sense. So I speculate that over the next year, there will be a lot learned about how to render XBRL.
Oh, good. Good. Well, Michael is asking, is there a taxonomy for debt collection, legal or otherwise?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can interpret that.
Mm-hmm.
I
think that Kurt mentioned earlier in the chat window that you can find all the taxonomies listed on xbrl.org. Is that correct?
So what's correct is at xbrl.org, they're all the publicly sort of published taxonomies.
Mm-hmm.
Also
okay.
a whole set of taxonomies that folks have built for internal use cases or limited sets like the microfinance exchange, folks like that. So The good news is that XBRL.org, there are a bunch of taxonomies that you can use, and one of the things we talked about is that you can take them and extend them to create something specific for what you need. But there's also a set of other taxonomies that were built and used internally. For example, it's used internally, so there may be a loan covenant taxonomy somewhere that we don't know about.
Okay.
So I would not say that that all the public taxonomies are there. The taxonomies that are on the XBRL International site are the ones that they put on the XBRL International site. There are many, many others that exist that are just not there.
Right.
Okay.
I would also speculate that XBRL GL can be used in that area. It seems to me there would be a lot of details you would want and need to process in order to, build a complete system to do debt collection type.
Right. And to Charlie's point, on the availability of taxonomies, XBRL US just actually published the 2009 version of US GAAP taxonomy, and I think you've got to go to XBRL.us to go get it.
Okay, excellent. And then this question may be a little bit vague, but Don is asking, can XBRL be used to compare investments?
So
That's what it was built. That's part of the reason it was built for. I mean, the public companies are companies that people invest in, and they want to compare this information. If they didn't want to compare the information, there'd be no need for XBRL because you just go to the documents, read the documents. But XBRL allows for the comparisons. So, an extreme example of what will happen is that. So right now there's a lot of really interesting things happening. One of the things it's sort of it's not directly part of XBRL, but it sort of is, and that is the trend toward the use of international financial reporting standards. So part of the problem with finding investments now is that different countries use different reporting standards, and it's hard to compare potential investments in one country to potential investments in another. What's happening now is that XBRL and IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards, are going to potentially, depends, we'll see what actually happens, but there is a potential of making it so that there's, one financial reporting standard used globally and one XML language for articulating that information. So, it's never, it could get significantly better to find and analyze these investments in other countries and get more information. And a lot of people don't realize that even in the U.S., only about 20% of the public companies are even tracked because it's so labor-intensive to analyze the information because it has to be rekeyed. So with XBRL, the volume of companies that will be analyzed will increase. So I would say definitely yes, you can use XBRL to analyze investments.
Okay, good. Good. And here's an amusing question I thought Edward was asking, is this going to drive demand is it going to drive demand for CPAs or XML developers?
Probably both.
Both, or both. Sounds like both.
Right.
Well, here's the way I see it.
Mm-hmm.
So you may want to go check out, if you're a CPA or if you are a developer, you may want to go check out a couple of other industries. For example, the shipping industry and how the shipping container impacted the shipping industry. There were winners and there were losers.
Uh-huh.
And digital photography and how there were winners there and there were losers there. The music industry, where there were winners and there were losers. And I can go on and on. So this is a happening deal. And, the amount of low-level programming that needs to be done, in my view, will likely decrease. It'll be done by people that are experts at doing that. High-level programming will need a lot more of that. And so the programmers need to understand more about business to understand and communicate with the business people that will need this information. And CPAs, in my view, the need for rekeying information, it's not really a high value add, and you can hire anybody to do it. It's not that hard. So the skill set of CPAs will, in my view, will change. And there will be skills that become more valuable, and there will be skills that become less valuable.
Okay.
So there was an interesting question about, from Philip, that says, will current filings by major filers, GE City, include XBRL coded data on credit default swaps and other toxic assets? It's actually a very interesting topic, and there have been a bunch of discussions both within the XBRL community, and actually there's been some testimony up on the Hill in terms of, can you in fact use XBRL to get more transparency around things like asset-backed securities and mortgage-backed securities. And there's actually been some preliminary work done in terms of building a taxonomy that allows people to better understand what these assets are made up of. If you've ever looked at it, FWP or 10D, it's a lot of unstructured information that's hard to dive into. So you could either go to the XBRL US website. There's a pointer to some of the testimony that Mark Bolgiano did up on the Hill. You can go to our website, and we actually have a white paper on XBRL and asset-backed securities and transparency.
Okay.
Any more questions, Catherine?
Let me see. It's hard to keep up because they seem to be answering each other's questions. Well, Don was asking if there is a repository of company information reported in XBRL. I'm not sure I understand that question.
Well, that's one of the things that the SEC's IDEA system will likely be. I mean, it will be. There are many repositories of information around the world. Some of them are made publicly available, some are not. For example, one repository that is publicly available, you have to jump through some hoops to get to it, which is the FDIC repository of basically 9,000 banks, all in XBRL. They call them call report, but it's basically their balance sheet and their income statement, and then some other information that is collected for regulatory purposes. I know that in China, Japan, Korea, they all have publicly available XBRL documents. I can't think of any others off the top of my head, but the answer is yes, there's lots. And the SEC, the Edgar system, the SEC Edgar system was called one of the most, I can't remember the exact term, important sets of information that the U.S. government made available. And, this is back in the late, or the 90s. I don't remember exactly when Edgar was made available. It was seen as a very highly valuable resource for the public. And IDEA is going to be even way more useful than that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next year or so.
Okay, good. Good. I think we're just about out of time. Do you have time for one more quick question?
Of course.
All right. I always like that answer. So Michael's asking, is all the information reported to SEC and XBRL public information in XBRL format? Sorry, I think I got the emphasis wrong there. So,
I saw the question. I'm not sure I understand. So the current is that all information that companies, so currently companies are filing under the voluntary filing program, and so you can in fact go to IDEA, as Charlie said, and pull out any of the information that's been filed in XBRL is readily available. As I think Diane mentioned, you can also get an RSS feed to find out as people file. You can get that information. Currently, the only folks who are filing are the folks under the voluntary filing program. In June, it will be folks who are part of that first tranche, which is the large accelerated filers with floats of more than $5 billion. And then over the next couple of years, it'll be all companies will be reporting, not just in the current sort of EDGAR format, but in XBRL. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, just to add to that slightly, and that's not all information. There are many documents that companies still have to file that are not required to be in XBRL currently, but in all likelihood, the SEC uses the term interactive data format. So there's some things that they make available in XML. I think that the SEC is going to eventually make everything available, but no, right now, not all information reported by companies is available, and it's going to be 3 years before all companies report information in XBRL.
Right, and Michael sort of added to his question, is available as XBRL or just a view? And the answer is you can download the XBRL. So in the SEC's case, it's not only the instance stock filed by the company, it's also the taxonomy extensions that they've done.
Yeah. So in my view, the SEC system is one of the better systems for making this information available. They are literally files on the internet that you can write an application and you can query the files. There's no password protection or anything that's required. They also make available RSS feeds that let you know when information is updated. The SEC does listen to people. If you've got ideas, they have public comments. They want people's advice. You may not think that they listen to you, but they actually do. And if someone's got an idea to make their system better, send it to me. I'll send it to the SEC. But yeah, the role of the SEC is to protect the investor, and that's most of us. So anything that we can do during this transition period to make it better for us or better for the SEC, it doesn't hurt to pass on that information to them. How you want this stuff to work.
Okay.
Right.
With that, I think we've run out of time, or Catherine can tell us. So I put up the slide with Charlie and my email, so you can either email us with questions, go hit Charlie's blog, or look at the variety of great information that's been put forth in the chat session. Catherine?
Yes, thank you very much, you guys. What an excellent presentation. I think we all learned a lot on a very important topic. And everyone, thank you for joining us today. Once again, if you want to save the chat window, now's the time. I'll just wait a minute, and you select all and copy. You can save it through WebEx, but let me tell you, it'll save it in proprietary format, and you won't be able to open it later, or you'll be able to open it with a great degree of trouble. So the best way is to copy and paste, and if you, for some reason, can't do that, just send an email to webcast@O'Reilly.com, and I will send you the file. And so thank you, everyone, and there will be a recording of this available. I will send a link as soon as we have it ready. That'll be in a day or two, and we'll get the slides up on SlideShare too. So thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.